Welcome to Navigating Hope, your compass to health empowerment. I'm Dr. Jaime Hope, steering you through healthcare, overcoming overwhelm, personal goals, and emergencies. We'll navigate the healthcare maze with actionable insights and real-world advice, unlocking the secrets to a healthier, more vibrant life. Join us to take control of your well-being and make informed decisions for your health and your future. Stay with us as we unravel the mysteries of medicine, wellness, and life's unforeseen challenges, helping you bypass the ER with a dose of knowledge. Stay tuned till the end of the episode with a recap of your actionable insights and a free gift. Let's chart a course to your well-being together. All right, welcome back to another episode of Navigating Hope. We have a very interesting topic. Timely because of the P. Diddy thing and a lot of things to dive into. So I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest, Mell McCracken. And they and I decided we're going to save the world in 30 minutes. We got this, right? Nope.
That's right. We got it covered.
Yeah, totally. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Mell McCracken is the executive director of No Matter What Recovery. And I love that. We need to talk about that. Serving as a leader in a clinical treatment program and overseeing our sexualized drug use curriculum. It's so interesting how we learn that sex and drugs are a separate thing. Mell is a fierce advocate for healing and transformation through substance abuse counseling, sex addiction therapy, and treatment program development. They have nearly a decade of experience and extensive expertise in empowering individuals to overcome their struggles with addiction and navigate the complexities of chemsex, which is a new word that some of us are being introduced to, in the rainbow community and everywhere. Mell is nationally and internationally recognized as an LGBT plus educator, co-author, and treatment provider. They serve as a faculty mentor at the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Specialists. And I love that you bring in trauma and addiction because not everybody becomes addicted without a little trauma. And they're committed to uplifting voices and breaking stigmas one conversation at a time. They have spent their career fighting for inclusivity and empowerment through chemsex education and LGBT plus activism. So I am so excited about this conversation. It's very timely with what's going on in the media. And we're going to dive in deeper into how this touches all of us. Yeah. Whether you're a parent, you're in the sandwich generation, you're taking care of your kids, you're taking care of your parents. Are they struggling with addiction? Are you just drinking enough mom juice to get through the day? There's a lot here to unpack. But Mell, so first of all, thank you so much for being here. And I would love for you to tell us, why are you passionate about this?
Well, one, I want to say thank you for having me. It's such a privilege always to get to be a part of any conversation that's talking about changing the framework and how we view addiction. So I'm really appreciative for being here. And why do I do this work? Well, I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I have walked through many fires and many doors to kind of get me where I am today. And so being a person in recovery, I was able to really recognize passion and purpose in my life that have led me here to this conversation with you, being a sober person.
And I love that. And we were talking before we hit the record button. Sometimes those are some of my most fun conversations, but that's relatable. Mm-hmm. It helps to see somebody that you can relate to and to understand and see. So thank you for sharing that you are a person in recovery. And so people know that it is possible to take that pain and turn it into purpose, that you have extensive education and experience, and you've dedicated your life to helping people.
Absolutely. I mean, we make meaning out of suffering. I think as humans, we need to make meaning in life. And so, there's a lot of suffering that comes with some of the slings and arrows of addiction. And for me, in my life, it was so important to create something from that.
That is amazing. Well, let's dive into the headlines. Okay. We've got I know, right? We've got some P. Diddy. We've got thousands of bottles of lube. And certainly people had heard of GHB as a date rape drug, but there's this whole complicated world of chemsex that I'm not sure was as mainstream. And this is the perfect opportunity to have proper education and some myth busting about what some people are hearing. So I would love it, Mel, if you would walk us through what that even means.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know this is like such a new term and it's being really sensationalized like in the media and it's giving it kind of a front and center seat right now, of which I'm really grateful for, right? And I think the first thing I want to touch on is like what is chemsex? Because a lot of people are like, what does that even mean? And so it's a to distinguish that it's not someone who has problematic sexual behavior and then they're abusing substances. Like these two things are being used concurrently, right? And they create a new singular addiction where there's no sex without substances, there's no substances without sex, and they're fused in the brain, right? The neural pathway becomes fused. If it fires together, it wires together. So I think it's important to really differentiate between someone who may struggle with problematic sexual behavior and substance use versus someone who is actually a chemsex addict.
Yeah, and I think that's really helpful because understanding what that term, the what wires together, fires together, and all of that. So how did this become, a thing with the P. Diddy thing? Do you think he was a chemsex addict? Do you think the other people involved in these freak offs were chemsex addicts? And now we also need to bring in the conversation of there's also clearly some victimization.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've been kind of talking very openly around this because not everyone who struggles with chemsex is a sexual predator. And what I'm seeing in the media is these two things being kind of woven together. Like anyone who struggles with sexualized drug use is automatically a predator or a victim of a crime. And so I really want to get away from that. And when I look at like the P. Diddy case, I can only make assumptions. It seems like a lot of people were actually led into these situations and then, kind of either dose with GHB, which is similar to a date rape drug, or, given substances that they didn't know what they were without their consent. And then, under the influence, they were preyed upon and they were victimized. So I don't know about the participants, but I do know that there was a huge betrayal around consent for anyone that attended these parties. And that is not something that is an everyday experience in the life of someone who struggles with sexualized drug use.
Yeah, so you've got different ways to look at it. Some people are using it, the substance, as a perpetrator. It's
Yes.
easier to subdue a victim. Some people have been victimized, but there are also a group of people who just struggle with that combined addiction
Right.
when you bring those two together that are participating in consensual encounters on both or multiple people's parties. So not everybody is just out there with thousands of bottles of laced lube, right? This is not the norm in your decade of experience. This isn't like
No,
the
this is, maybe 5% of a very specific population who really is in the throes of suffering and addiction, usually relating all the way back to, being a traumatized individual in the world. And even thinking about what you said about P. Diddy, was he always, a chemsex addict? I don't know that information, but from what I have been able to gather, is this is a person that felt like he had to be a closeted gay man and like where that might lead a person having to hide who you are as a person in the world and be expected to perform in a certain identity, you might start to use substances to kind of, push back and quell the inauthenticity that you have to live your life through. So I'm not giving any sort of passes here to sexual predatory behavior, and I
of
want to be
course not.
clear, but like I see a lot of individuals who have kind of a very similar experience of turning to substances to dull and dull the pain of not being able to live freely in the world.
And I think that seems to be a theme that I hear among people who are authentic and genuine voices of help in this huge addiction space is
Mhm.
that what is the trauma underneath? And so there are people who, based on their profession or societal expectations, can't,
Mhm.
according to them, right? Their narrative. Professional athletes have struggled with this.
Mhm.
Performers, people who are very public figures, have struggled with this. And so then we see these sensationalized stories of encounters in bathrooms and these sneaky things. So
Mhm.
in your line of work, do you see a lot of people who have had to hide who they were for whatever reason? And how does that connect with the substance?
I mean, I think in so many ways, because I think we all have this internal sense of knowing of who we are and how we show up in the world. And when I'm met with the world, that is not friendly, that is phobic, that is oppressive, that is violent, then I have no choice but to choose safety above all those things. And that safety might look like hiding who I am. And I mean, in my experience, listen, I'm a beauty pageant survivor and I share that. I share that openly and honestly. And I am also identify as a non-binary queer individual in the world. And so there's kind of this script that was given that I was made to follow of like, oh, you look pretty, you put on the dresses based on the body that I grew up in. And that was not who I was at all. So there becomes this split in identity. It's like the performance, the expectations, and the pressures of what I was born into versus actually who I am in the world. And those two things were wildly different. And trying to mask and cover up and hide gets really heavy and really burdensome. So I think a lot of people use substances to kind of deal with the emotional landscape of what it's like to hide who you are.
It sounds exhausting to have to hide like that. And especially, I mean, that is such a scripted, that's a whole, we could have a whole podcast just on
And we
that.
could.
As a very fascinating world. But so to hide who you are as somebody who is non-binary, or for somebody who is a queer individual, or even somebody who has had sexual trauma or
Mhm,
some type of trauma as a child and have to put on the good face because you don't want to upset the family and
mhm,
tell the thing.
mhm,
And so we're carrying these secrets and these traumas inside. And even in our conversation before we started the recording, and I said I've helped people in the human trafficking space. And
mhm,
if I were being sold 20 plus times a day, I would probably want to be on drugs too. So we've got all these things that people are experiencing, the masks, we're hiding the pain. And this is whether it does it matter what substance it is? Is it always alcohol? Is it
I mean,
shopping? What does it look like?
I think it really varies. And, I come from the camp of trauma is much less about the story of what has happened to you and much more about the story of what happens inside of you. And most people who experience complex trauma or PTSD or big life events, there's a disruption in the way your nervous system operates. So oftentimes it gets stuck on high, right? And you may be in the fight or flight response or even a fawn response, which is that people pleasing that comes up for most of your life after those occurrences. And I see people who are using substances like opioids, fentanyl, alcohol, being the ones that are living in that sympathetic nervous system state, and they're just trying to cope. And it doesn't matter if it's gambling, if it's shopping, if it's, digital media, like sex, drugs, any of those things. Like everyone is just trying to feel a little bit more comfortable while, not actually looking at the roots and the foundation of why they may be turning towards substances. It's just to ease the dysregulation of a wounded nervous system.
Yeah, and you shared a quote with me that was very profound, that pain is an invitation. Because we like to run away from pain. If you put your hand on the hot stove, you pull it away. So can you enlighten us around that? So fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some brilliance in my life, and one of those is my supervisor, and she has always said that pain is the invitation into transformation, right? This is a quote that I've seen her stand by and live by, and I've also adopted this because we are so conditioned to run away from discomfort and to seek pleasure or just to find some sort of grounding and regulation that we miss this beautiful opportunity to step in maybe to a higher calling. And it's actually confronting and walking through the pain in which we heal. Right. I think like, if someone breaks their arm and probably comes into your ER, right? The first injury is going to be the broken arm. And the second injury is going to be the resetting of the arm, right? Where there might be a little bit more pain in order to set it into the right place. And I really, when I work with people in recovery, I think of kind of, that same metaphor because that's actually what we're doing. The first pain is the bottom that got you in here. The second pain is going to be resetting your injury to making sure it heals right. And we're going to have to walk through some very uncomfortable things. We're going to have to address underlying trauma, underlying mental health issues. And all of this it's not going to be the most pleasant experience. There'll be moments of joy, of course, like, you're pretty much stepping out of hell and into the light. So it's going to be really bright and uncomfortable when you first step into that. And, we were talking a little bit about the Sackler family, and they've demonized pain. Like, this is how our whole opioid crisis actually started, is like we have been conditioned to run away from it rather than explore it and be curious about why the pain. I mean, I think Gabor Mate says that, not why the addiction, but why the pain. Like, and I'm with that.
Yeah, well, and it is super fascinating because we have demonized pain. And so I see people in the ER and they have a cold and they're like, they come in and an hour later, like, well, I still feel sick. I'm like, what? I don't have a magic wand, right? Like when you're sick, you're going to feel a little sick. We can do what we can. Or
Hmm.
in different cultures have very different ideas. Like I had my appendix out and I just expected, well, I just had abdominal surgery. I'm going to be sore. And they're trying to give me this giant bottle of opiates. And I'm like, why would I want to be constipated after I just had abdominal surgery? No, thank you. Not my jam. Fortunately, the one time I did take Vicodin back in the day after knee surgery, I barfed my guts out for hours. So that was the beginning and end of that,
Hmm.
which is
Thank
great.
goodness.
Right, I know, right? I was like, I was so happy that I had that reaction. So I'm like, well, that I'm never gonna struggle with that. But you have that expectation. You had surgery, you're gonna be sore. Here's, try out not just ignoring pain and saying we're not gonna treat you, but also expectation. You're gonna be sore. Here's some Tylenol, here's a hot pad, take some days off.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And
And
like, even, I think in both our lines of work, like pain is a symptom, right? And it is the symptom of the problem. So if we're constantly masking and covering up, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain, we're not actually going to be able to identify what the problem is. And if you're like a
yes,
person that makes it through addiction and you're walking through the world with a heartbreak and you're constantly numbing and covering up that heartbreak, how will we know what is the direction? How will we know what to address? You have to kind of let go of the substances and thaw out, so to speak, and experience the heartbreak so we know it hurts and how to help.
yeah. And I love what you do. And because of that, not just the immediacy of needing like detox and stuff like that. People Narcan and they can wrap their heads around that. But then to heal,
Yeah.
not mask, but just to heal who they are. So let's talk about there's a range. So I see people in my ER who are strung out on crack and homeless.
Hmm.
But and then I see the wealthy socioeconomic mom juice thing where you had 5 glasses of Chardonnay at your kid's soccer game, but it doesn't count because it's expensive Chardonnay.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
And so we have this whole spectrum of people. I'd love to get your take on how they are viewed and how they come to treatment.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would like to say to that is like alcohol is culturally accepted, right? And like crystal meth is not as culturally accepted.
So
So
you're not people, there's not like mom juice and mom like crystal meth in the back
like
of a
mom meth, that's
no,
not a
there's no
thing.
mom meth.
Yeah, that's not a thing. So I think it's really changing our views of, an alcoholic is no different than a crystal meth addict. Like the brain and the way that it's moving towards something is still operating in the same way. Now, listen, is a crystal meth addict going to hit a bottom a lot faster than maybe a mom who's having 5 glasses of fancy Chardonnay? Probably, right? And that's what we're going to see and recognize. Like you said, like there'll be homelessness, there job insecurity, financial insecurity, like all of these things. It's just a faster track to the same place, though. Like, and I think it is our cultural acceptance of someone being an alcoholic versus someone being an opiate addict or a crystal meth addict. I think that's what needs to change is the way that we speak to those things because they're no different.
And there's so much stigma, there's so much judgment. And I was talking to you about Genius Recovery, which is an organization I'm part of. And it's just about changing that global conversation because however many millions of people in the US struggle with addiction, what is the statistic? Like 10% or less are actually getting treatment?
Yeah, yeah. That and in Los Angeles County is where I'm at. They did a poll and they did a survey a couple of years ago on why people weren't going into treatment. And it's because drugs have changed and the way that they affect the brain has changed. So a person's willingness to enter treatment despite the consequences has also shifted, right? And it was actually drug dependent because I think of crystal meth in this way, like we went from 30% purity to 100% purity in the last 10 years. So the injury and the impact that has on the brain resembles a traumatic brain injury. So you're asking someone with a traumatic brain injury, do you want treatment? Right? So, no, they're going to be so engaged in their addiction that they're not even going to be able to see that as a viable resource for them. And so people aren't getting the help that they need. And it has much to do with the shift in how drugs are produced, how they're manufactured, and how they're controlled, as much as it does with what's available, right? And a lot of privileged people have access to treatment. And I'm always sharing that treatment is a privilege. Like you have private health insurance, like you're able to have, therapy, you're able to have access to resources, but there's such a huge population out there that is really in the devastating effects of prolonged addiction that don't have those. They can't even pick up a phone and call if they wanted to, right?
Yeah, yeah. In the way that the war on drugs turned into a war on humans struggling
Yeah.
instead of actually stopping. And we're seeing the same problem with fentanyl. Even, teenagers at a party making a one-time bad decision like, hey, I'm going to try this pill with my friends and don't know it's fentanyl. They're paying with their lives. They're dying. So you're right. Drugs are very different now.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, just to speak to that point, I can't tell you how many instances and funerals I have been to because someone made one decision to take one pill that was laced with fentanyl and
Yeah.
they're no longer here.
Yeah, and that's why I do a lot with trying to spread Narcan. And it's not what some people think is that I'm out there saying, great, use opioids.
Mm.
What we're saying is you shouldn't pay with your life for one decision.
That's right. And I mean, if you look at the statistics since harm reduction, especially around the opioid crisis, has really hit home around the importance of just carrying fentanyl with you, right? I ran into someone 2 years ago, and I'm pretty trained on like clear signs of overdose, right? And I've been Narcan trained. And had I not had it in that car, in my car that day, this person probably would have overdosed in a gas station, but because I had it available, I knew what to look for. I was trained. Please go get trained if you're not trained in and how to administer
Yeah,
Narcan or signs
it's
of an
actually
overdose.
it's not that scary or chill. I have some in my cupboard. I have family members who are going off to college, and it's just like, here's your sweater for college, and here's your cute laundry basket, and here's some Narcan, whether it's for you or your friends, just so you're not paying with your life. But in that you spray it up their nose, it doesn't have to be intimidating. It's not saying,
Mm-mm.
yes, everybody, let's go do drugs, but we live to play another day, right?
We do. And in that other day, maybe this is a wake-up call to get help and resources, but if you don't have access to that because of one choice and one decision, then, what good are we kind of doing? And, stats are going down on overdose rates because people are becoming more informed on how to use Narcan and spot overdose.
Yes, absolutely. And just the knowledge out there, if somebody has the signs of an overdose and you squirt some, Narcan nasal spray in their nose and it turns out they weren't on opioids, you didn't hurt them, right?
No,
It's fine. They're fine.
no, it's fine.
Yeah, I
I'd
mean,
rather
you and I could,
err on the side of caution here than
yes.
not.
I mean,
Yes,
you and I could squirt some right now and we'll be fine. I'll just be
we'd be
like,
fine.
okay, now my nose is running. No, so I like the harm reduction strategies. That's the type of things that are coming out, harm reduction strategies, trauma informed care. These are the kind of things that are changing that global conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we didn't even start really looking at like trauma and PTSD until like the 80s, right? And
Yes.
looking at the ways that, people were trying to cope, especially around like Vietnam War veterans. They think about that's where all of the talk on trauma and therapy really came
Yes.
as a result of people coming back from war and being unable to manage their lives. And we've grown a lot in the field to know that it's, addiction is a war. And as a person who's lived in the experience of it, you're at war with yourself almost every single day. And granted, you're not in combat fire, but if you are, you have housing insecurity, you're on the street, you're being attacked almost every day, your stuff is being stolen, it really resembles like a wartime landscape. So being able to have like all of the information and be armed with like what trauma therapy is to treat people who are on the other side of addiction has been revolutionary in this field.
Yeah. And it is so fascinating because we do have this possibly false idea that, and it's this trauma comparison, right? Well, if I wasn't my leg blown off in a war and experienced all these things, then my trauma isn't that bad. So then there's judgment for the drinking or the whatever. So there's this trauma comparison problem. And
Mhm.
instead of just saying sometimes people cope with trauma in ways that are not serving them.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm always like so generous in the assumption that you adapted to this the best way you knew how. Like this is the best you had available to you. right? And, for a lot of people, especially in the work that I do, fantasy becomes the first escape for a lot of people. So that disconnection starts to happen very, very early on, especially people that experience like early childhood developmental trauma or relational trauma. And then you start to like get conditioned to living in a fantasy world, which just then escalates and escalates and escalates as soon as, romance comes in the picture or sex or substances enter your life. It's just an escalation of disconnection from not being able to tolerate certain circumstances.
Yeah. And it is easier. It's more comfortable. It's that dopamine thing, but it's not even necessarily just about the substance. It's that as you're reaching for it, like, what is this reach
Yeah.
telling you?
Yeah.
I'm experiencing a discomfort when I'm reaching for this.
Mhm.
And that's where you come in with what you do. So I see people in the ER. I always say I see people on the worst day of their life. It's a normal Tuesday morning for the people who are working there, but we recognize it's the worst day of their life. And sometimes it's hard to see that light at the end of the tunnel that you were talking
Right.
about, just that they can get into joy. So how do your programs work? What kind of expectations do people have so they, instead of just reaching for it, they can heal all of this?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm gonna go back to the broken arm. We have people that come into treatment and expect their broken arm to be healed in a week. And
Oh, the
I want to
magic
be out
wand. You
playing
have
like,
that too? I have a,
yeah, yeah, like
yeah.
I want to be on the softball field. I
Yeah, we
got
can
stuff to
heal
do.
30 years of trauma, sure,
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
week.
right,
Yeah.
right. So like the expectations of people who often come into treatment really downplay the amount of time it takes to be a person in recovery and to recover. So, we've been sold this 28-day, 30-day program idea, all the way back from like the Nancy Reagans in the 1980s, right? And that's where this just kind of, first took hold. And then you have some luxury rehabs that say they have a cure in 30 days, which is so not true. The brain heals about 14 months, right? That's about how long the brain is going to take to heal from any sort of substance
I
use.
heard a great expression from Joe Polish, who we talked about, who's the founder of Genius Recovery, called cruel optimism.
Mm. Hmm.
That's cool. Like, how are you supposed to rewire a decade or more in 30 days and for the bargain price of, 100 grand?
Right. Yeah,
It,
it's impossible and it sets unreasonable expectations for people coming into treatment, right? And I think, treatment programming works first is safety and stability. And that's physical safety and stability, that's medical safety and stability. And then we work towards emotional safety and stability, distress tolerance, like relapse prevention planning. If you struggle with sexualized drug use, you're also going to need a sexual recovery plan because you're starting to integrate that. Or, if an eating disorder might pop up 3 months into it because as people recover and as they get kind of more in their sober mind, other things start to pop up. So I think it's so important to have a treatment facility behind you if this is your journey and you're kind of wanting to enter in recovery. So you have trained, skilled clinicians to be like, hey, we've noticed that you've been restricting. Like, because as soon as you take the substances away, all these other, I'm going to call them adaptive. I don't just subscribe to maladaptive coping because I think everybody just is doing the best they can. So all these other adaptive things start to pop back up. And, all of a sudden I'm reaching for food, or I notice, I just spent 2 days straight at the casino or whatever it is. And, having people around you who are skilled and can kind of help with that and not leaving before those things show up because they usually do. There's always some sort of secondary underlying adaptive skill that needs to be addressed while you're in treatment. And then, after safety and stability, it's really about, getting down to the roots of why the tree is growing, right? It's not just clipping the leaves because they're going to grow back, right? You trim a tree, it's going to bloom again. You trim a tree, it's going to grow bigger and bloom again. I think about a rose bush, right? I go out and prune my rose bush, right? And I'm cutting it off, and then next spring it's massive. So, yes, all of a sudden I got roses for days. But it's really like helping people get down to the root of the underlying causes and whether that's undiagnosed mental health issues or underlying trauma that hasn't been properly integrated and processed. And so people have been using substances. The treatment journey can really help an individual look at those things.
yeah. And what an incredible way to look at it because, as people come in, they're in some level of crisis. So you're like, okay, first let's get that stability. But I love how you frame it in that long-term thing because those other adaptive behaviors, whether it's around control or soothing or whatever it is, normalizing that these things may pop up, and that's why there's no magic wand. There's no quick fix.
No, I always say I would gladly be out of a job if there was like a book, a pill, anything I could give, like anyone who's been suffering, because at the very root of trauma is just suffering. And then we beget suffering, right? And stopping that cycle of suffering, if there was just anything I could give to anyone, I would be like, here it is. You got
Yes.
it. Like,
And I've had a friend of mine joke, Brianna Greenspan, who wrote Miracle Morning Art of Affirmation. She laughed at me. She's like, "You're the only person I've ever met trying to put yourself out of a job." But you're one of those light workers. You would love to put yourself out of a job, right?
absolutely. I would love to live in a world where there was less suffering and people, it didn't have to hurt as much. I think we as
Yeah.
humans, we all kind of want that for each other, right? And this is not a short-term fix. This is a long-term haul. This is not a sprint. This is, learning how to pace yourself, create balance in your life, cultivate joy, cultivate happiness, and cultivate identity. Because when you come out of addiction, there's an identity crisis, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I do not even recognize that person or who I was or how I acted or the things that I've done, right? And I've actually been really contemplating and talking a lot about the moral injury that comes on the other side of addiction and how to help people reconcile the identity crisis of what it means to be a person in recovery. Because you might not like the same type of foods. You might not be attracted to the same people. You might not be attracted to the same places. It completely shifts who you think you are in the world if you've lived through addiction, right? And even I'm thinking about your mom juice folks, like
Yes.
even that, I'm wondering what it might be like for them to kind of wake up day by day and kind of doing the same habitual routine with the Chardonnay over and over and over. There's a sense of loss of oneself that comes with that. But we just get so locked into the mundane of alcoholism that it completely numbs out like any sort of authentic expression. So we work a
Yeah.
lot with like moral injury and identity crisis too.
Well, and that's fascinating. I always talk to people about the name tag effect. That's one of the terms I use a lot. Where, those cheap hello, my name is name
Mhm.
tags at events, and we're wearing them. It's part of, we're expected to have, okay, a name, a gender identity, all those things that are very explicit to society, as you're aware. But what were you told? Beauty pageant. So you have to be like, smile, and you have to use your body to make other people happy. That, I
Yeah,
mean, that's
that's
that
right.
is literally what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so there's those different identity things around all of this are huge.
Mhm.
And and I'm sure you're well aware, some people like to refer to themselves with a label, say, that you go to an AA meeting and say, I'm an alcoholic because they find it useful. And some people don't, so they don't get help because they refuse a label.
Right. Yeah.
And occasionally I've had patients who are like, well, I'm an alcoholic, so that's why I drink. And then, so they took that label in the other direction.
Yeah, yeah, they flipped it. Like,
Like, that wasn't the idea.
yeah,
So that identity component is huge.
yeah, yeah. And I see that a lot too. Like, I'm the alcoholic, so I drink. Like, that comes in a lot. And I'm like, well, then you're in treatment. So my assumption is that you probably want to quit drinking. But being an alcoholic determines your thinking, not your drinking, right? That
Yeah.
determines how you see the world, your perception, and how you're interpreting like sensory information, right? But yeah, the identification I think is really important for a lot of people because most folks just want a place to belong. They want a place
Yeah.
to be. They want a group of people. They want connection. They want to know that they're visible, right? And for a lot of folks who need to subscribe to labels to kind of reclaim an identity, I'm all for that, right? Whatever gives you a sense of connection, whatever, includes you and as your whole self, like, yes, move in that direction. Go where it's warm. Go where the love is. Go where your heart lights up. Like, because that's the healing space more than
Oh, yeah. Oh, it so much is. And so I love that you're normalizing that it is, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that there is no quick fix. I also know that can feel a little intimidating for people at the beginning. So like setting that expectation so they don't have that cruel optimism that they're going to be cured and can just go drink like a normie
hmm
in 28 days.
hmm
So how do you balance that, the realism versus the intimidation of that?
I mean, I would say that balance comes from really like seeing the person in front of me and really getting to know like what's meaningful to them in their life. What values do they hold? And I think it's with those two things that we start to actually orient ourselves in a different direction. So it's much less about the cure-all or the, long distance run. It's more about like living out of alignment with who you are. And if I'm in active addiction and I am out of integrity, I'm not showing up when I say I'm going to show up, I'm missing work, like that's only going to compound the shame that's actually the driver, right? So I really look to people and I'm very curious about what you value in this world. And I consider like recovery, it's just a life orientation. Like I'm orienting my life in a completely different direction, right?
Mm,
Because this was not working for me. I didn't feel good here. And I am positive across the board, whether it's positive recovery, positive psychology, positive sex positive, all the things. And what I mean by that is I don't mean silver lining things and I don't mean sugarcoating things because I think we get in the weeds with that sometimes. What I do mean is I want you to feel good in the life you're living. Because if you point your life in a direction that is aligned with your values, that really has an internal sense of compass, which I think we all have access to, that gets kind of clouded and shrouded in active addiction, then your chances of staying in recovery are going to be a lot higher because you're going to love the life you're in. I want people to be in love with their life, with their friendship, with their program, with whatever, a partnership they have. Like, learning to be in love with your life and building a life that you want to live in, I think is one of the key components of keeping people in their recovery. But if
wow.
I'm coming from a life and my goal is to get back to that life, my question is why? That life led you here. Let's look at how to build a different one.
And that's such a fascinating way to frame it because people, like I have many friends who are in long-term recovery. And at first, when people are starting, they're focusing on, oh, I have to give up this or I have to quit this. But people who are in long term, they're like, I gave up baggy eyes, heartburn, embarrassing text, losing my job, DUIs. Like that's what they're giving up to
Hmm.
get into this life that they love. And
Right.
so I think that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, and it's like, I know surrender is a big term that we use often in recovery spaces. And if you look up the definition of surrender, it means to join the winning team. That's literally what it means. So it's like you get, and I'm not saying recovery is the winner, but like that's what you're doing. You're letting go of these things. You're surrendering some things in order to join something different and to create new connection and new community and a life of fulfillment that's aligned with who you are.
That is the most perfect and inspiring description of recovery. I love that. And so, if there's anybody listening to this, whether they feel like maybe they have questions, it's not the are you an alcoholic or not? It's not this like a binary, right? We've learned like way too many things we thought were binary are not binary.
Yeah,
But maybe ask yourself, is this serving me?
right.
Am I living the life that's in alignment with my values? And that starts to bring in a bigger audience. Or, hey, I notice I'm reaching for a lot of shopping, gambling, sex. Well, it doesn't matter what the thing is, math. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Fill in the blank. Am
Mhm.
I reaching for that? And what is it that I need to serve in myself?
Right. Yeah. What's going to feel good for me outside of these kind of adaptive coping skills that I've either learned or have been sold to me? I mean, the even like the self-help book industry, I'm like, that's like a $8 billion industry
Right.
where people are just constantly trying to look for the thing that's going to fix them, that's going to, really propel them into the next level of life. And I'm like, Glinda the Good Witch, it's like, you've had the power all along, my dear. We just need to help you recover it. Like, recovery is, again, like recovering who we really are,
Mm,
stripping down all the other things and recovering that sense of self.
that's incredible. That is incredible. So I know that it touches people's lives regardless of your identity, regardless of your profession, regardless of your socioeconomic status, whether as you're listening to this, you can relate if it's you or if it's somebody you love.
Yeah.
Statistically, people listening to this have a family member, have a loved one, have a friend. That can't imagine that there's a person on the planet that's going to hear this and not know somebody in their life who needs this message.
Yeah. And I can't. name a single person that I've ever met in my life in and out of this work that hasn't been touched by alcoholism, addiction, or dysfunction in some sort of way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that taking that time to recognize it, that also means we need the underlying trauma recognition and trauma healing. And so I really love, love, love the work that you do.
Thank you.
It's so incredible. So I know that there are going to be so many people who are sitting there, in their car or in the bathroom or folding laundry or whatever it is that you're doing that are saying I relate to this and I want help. So what is the best way for people to find you, Mel?
Well, you can email me pretty easily, I suppose, at Mell, Mell, at no matter what, recovery.com.
Yep. And
And
we'll put all of that in the show notes too. So
perfect.
everybody
Yep.
doesn't have to worry about typing, but
Okay, good. Yeah.
so email is good, website is good, Instagram.
Email, go to our website. We have an Instagram. Yeah. There's all different ways to kind of get a hold of us. And, I always try and make myself available for any comments or questions or curiosities that anyone would ever have, because the only reason I'm here today is because someone else picked up the phone for me.
Ah,
So I make it a point to make my recovery and my service and just myself available in this world.
I love that. And the curiosity thing, even if somebody is like, I may, whether or not they know if they have a label or not, it doesn't matter if they just have some questions.
Yeah, totally. Be curious about it. Like you were talking about, like the distance between here and here. Be curious about the distance in the reach and what you're reaching for.
Yeah.
Like before we just act on impulse or habitual conditioning to pick up something or to do something, if you take a 2-second gap and just be curious about, why am I reaching for this right now? What am I trying to do by ingesting this or taking this? Like that right there will give you so much information, but we do things so quickly without thought.
Yeah. Or to turn off the thought.
Yeah, that too.
Oh my goodness, Mel, this is wonderful. This is the start of a great relationship because as I said, I have other people to connect you with in the genius recovery world. But so thank you for being here in my Navigating Hope world and making a difference because this truly does touch everybody, whether you are struggling and you can relate to this yourself or as a caregiver or a loved one. There is help. Only 10%, maybe even less than that, of people who are struggling are getting help. And so we really need to spread and normalize this message, not only in a harm reduction way, but also that there are ways to heal. And it's not this horrible, awful slog. You actually get reconnected with that joy.
Yeah, yeah. Reconnected with all the things, creativity, joy, abundance, alignment. I think everything is just available on the other side of one's curiosity.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Mel. This has been an
So
incredible
much.
episode.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into Navigating Hope with me, Dr. Jaime Hope. It has been an honor to navigate the realms of health and wellness with you today. Remember, in the journey toward a healthier life, knowledge is your compass. If you enjoyed our time together, please share, like, and subscribe to Navigating Hope. Join us next week where we'll continue to empower your health journey, arming you with the wisdom to navigate life's challenges and keep the emergency room in your rearview mirror.